Welcome to the third and final installment of this series where I am showing y'all how I make shoes. Last time we covered the construction process, video before that we did all the prep, and now this time we're finally going to cover lasting and then putting the soles on. So we are going to finish this shoe this time around. Lasting is by far the most important step. A lot of people in shoemaking say that last comes first because the last itself is such an important tool when it comes to making shoes. I'll kind of touch on how important they are as we go through this, but this is how we're going to finish the shoe. As a reminder, this is where we left off in the last video, all ready to last, and then this is what an actual last looks like. Mine are made out of plastic, but you can also get lasts that are made out of wood. I also get my lasts from SD Custom Footwear, which is the same company that I get my patterns from. And while I'm nailing on my lasting board, which is going to be essentially the very, very bottom layer of the shoe, let me talk to you a little bit about why the last is so important. So the last is completely custom to the style of the shoe. So this particular last is only for Air Force Ones. I have ones for Air Jordan ones. I have ones for Air Maxes. It depends on the style of the shoe. There's also like generic sneaker ones, generic ones for heels. Just depends on the shape of the shoe that you're wanting to make. And then also if you're going to do heels, you would want the heel height to correspond with the last as well. And to officially start lasting, I always start by anchoring the heel. This is going to be a really, really important step to get that heel anchored on. This will sort of dictate whether or not the shoe will be straight on the last. So feel free to, if you put a nail in the wrong place or if it's not quite lined up, take that nail out and nail it again. I will often take the nails out and do it again until I get it right. This is something that you really want to take your time on. It's also something that it takes time to learn how to do it properly. So this is something that practice makes perfect for sure. So take your time, really look at it, pick up the last. It's a 3D object, right? So move it all around, look at how it is situated on the last before you put all those nails in. Once the heel is anchored, I'm then going to start lasting the rest of the shoe. So I start by doing just the mid part of the shoe down to the heel. So I'll pull on one side, put in a nail, and then switch to the other side just to balance the pressure on the leather. This will make sure that it's, again, situated nice and straight on the last. Now that the mid part of the shoe and the back part of the shoe is lasted, I can then move on to the toe. And this is where that step of not gluing the toe lining is going to come into play. So I gently peel back the top layer of the toe, and I'm only going to last the lining first. So this is a very, very thin leather, but it does need to be nice and snug against that last. So you're just going to apply even pressure again all the way around. You might need to add quite a few nails into that toe to really get it nailed down correctly, pardon the pun, but just put as many nails as you need, and again, you can remove those nails, put them back in as many times as you need to get that toe nice and smooth before we last the outside of the toe. Now that the toe lining is lasted, I'm going to add in a product called Toe Puff. So this is a thermoplastic that's just going to give the toe some stability so it doesn't crush in on itself. So because this is a thermoplastic, I'm going to apply it by heating it up with my heat gun. So I start by applying a little bit of heat right in the middle just to stick it on, and then I'll just heat different portions of the toe puff and stick it on. Want to make sure this is nice and smooth. Because it's going to be underneath the leather, it can show through. So you want to make sure that this is as smooth as you can get it without any bumps. So now we are ready for our first round of gluing. So I'm going to be using a contact cement called Barge, and it comes with a brush already in it. So I'm going to use the brush that comes in the can and just kind of stick it down into those crevices. I want to make sure that I really get my brush in there to get all the way into the edge of my sole board. I'm going to give this about 5 minutes to cure. Once the glue is dry to the touch, then I will go in and press down all those edges so that all that lasting I did is now permanent. After the toe lining has been glued down, we're now ready to actually last the outside of the shoe. So first and foremost, I do need to remove all of the nails out of the toe of the shoe. I'm also going to use a very, very sharp utility knife. You want to make sure that this is as sharp as you can possibly get it to cut down all those ridges. We want this lining to be as smooth as possible so that we can then last the outside of the shoe right on top of it. And before I start lasting the outside of my toe, I'm going to apply a layer of that Barge glue to the entire toe. The only difference here is I'm not going to let it dry. I'm going to apply the glue and immediately start lasting. That way I can still move the toe around, but then slowly over time that glue inside will set, and then that toe will not be going anywhere. So to last this toe, I'm doing it the same way I did the lining, where I'm just very carefully going around and applying even pressure. I'm putting in as many nails as I need to get it as smooth as possible. Something you're going to want to pay attention to during this step also is that now you can actually see how the pieces of the shoe fit onto the last, and we're making aesthetic decisions now. So you do want to make sure that the shoe is lasted properly, but you're also paying attention to where this lines you stitched fall on the last so that the shoe looks the way it's supposed to. Once the toe is lasted, we'll go in for a second round of that Barge. So same thing, using the brush that comes in the can and just shoving it down into those crevices. Once the second round of glue is set, you can then remove all of your nails through the entire bottom of the shoe, and then we're gonna go in with that super sharp utility knife again and make the bottom of the shoe as flat as we possibly can get it. And now we are finally ready to put the soles on. So I have to get some donors. So I'm removing these off of a different pair of Air Force Ones. I will say there's several different ways to remove soles. What I normally do is I fill the entire shoe with acetone and I let it sit for about 20 minutes, and then normally I can peel them off pretty easily. I will say specifically with Air Force One soles, because they have such a high wall, they do require quite a bit of heat to remove them. So that is why I'm using a heat gun specifically on this style of shoe. There's a few different other types of ways that you can remove soles. This is just the one that I'm using for this particular pair. Once the soles have been successfully removed, I'm then going to take my uppers and set them down into the sole themselves and use a heat removable marker to go all the way around the outside of the shoe and mark where that sole hits them. That pin mark will then be my guide for where I should rough up the leather, so I'm using a Dremel to go through and remove the top layer of the leather all the way around. This will allow the glue to adhere much better and will allow the sole to stick to the shoe much more strongly. To attach the soles, I'm using a very, very strong glue called Renia. I don't know if this is actually made specifically for attaching soles, but it is a very, very strong, also very toxic glue. You want to make sure that you use this outside or in a room that is very, very ventilated. So I'm going to paint that on both the inside of the sole and then right along the bottom of the shoe up to that line that we just dremeled out. I'm going to give that about 10 minutes to cure, and once the glue is dry to the touch, I'm going to pop them into a 200-degree oven for 2 minutes. This will reactivate the glue on both the bottoms of the shoes and inside the soles, and then I will put the upper onto my lasting pin that just holds it in place so that I can place the sole. This glue is extremely, extremely sticky, so you don't have a lot of chances to correct things if you place the sole incorrectly. So just be very gentle when you first place it on. That gives you a little bit of time to kind of get it exactly in the right place. Once you're happy with the placement, you will smack the crap out of the shoe with a hammer, and then you are officially ready to remove the laces and remove the last. And for one last and final step, I have to then stitch the soles. So I'm going to be using what's called a sewing awl, which is essentially a giant needle with a hook on it. And I use a very, very thick thread and I pull that through, and I want to have equal lengths on the inside and the outside of the shoe. And what I'm going to do is a saddle stitch. So I'll stick that all into each hole that is already existing on the sole, because it was stitched before. I had to remove the stitching to get that sole off. So there's already holes in the sole. That's the holes I'm going to use to stick the awl into, and then I pull a loop of the thread from the inside to the outside, string the outside thread through it, and then pull that very taut. This will make sure that the sole will never ever come off of these shoes. All right, and just like that, we now officially have a finished shoe. I hope that this series was informative. I know that I'm a very hands-on learner, so I hope that this gives you at least like a jumping off point if this is something that you're interested in, to maybe look into more resources or again, take a class. Really can't recommend that enough if you're interested in shoemaking, because it's just really nice to be hands-on with an instructor who knows what they're doing. Shoemaking is something that I'm very, very passionate about. It's something that I've wanted to do essentially my whole life. Ever since I was a child, I have wanted to do this. So the fact that I can now say that I know how to make shoes is actually kind of mind-boggling. But I hope that this was informative and maybe inspires you to, maybe not if you're not going to try shoemaking, try something that is very off the beaten path, that is a skill that not a lot of people have, because it's really fun to be able to make stuff that not a lot of people know how to make. Of course, if you have questions about anything that was covered in this video or in this whole series, please let me know. I would love to continue making shoe content. I'll always make both. Like, making clothing is also such a huge part of my life. For me, I need to do both for my creative process. They're both very important to me. So for sure, we'll continue making stuff about clothes, but I would like to mix in shoe stuff as well. If there's anything specific you would love to see, let me know, and I will see y'all on the next one. Bye.